Good evening, dear friends. I'm really happy to welcome you to the second lecture of this year Open Lecture Series, which is organized by the Faculty of Architecture of Estonian Academy of Arts, and the lecture series supported by Cultural Endowment of Estonia. And I'm very glad, and it's my pleasure to introduce our lecturer, Professor Pippo Ciorra. And I'm very glad that Pippo is from Rome, not from North Italia. So luckily we got you here. So, going on, so Pippo is an architect, critic and professor since 2009. He's the senior curator for architecture at the MAXXI Museum in Rome, and he's longtime editor-in-chief of Casabella, member of the editorial board of Casabella from 1996 to 2012. He collaborates with journals, reviews, and national press, and is author of many essays and publications. In 2011, he has published an overview of the conditions of architecture in Italy, Senza architettura le ragioni per una crisi. He's author of a number of books, and he's published monographic studies on Ludovico Quaroni in 1989 and Peter Eisenman in 1993. And then about museums, city photography, and contemporary Italian architecture. He teaches design and theory at University Camerino and is the director of the international PhD program, Villard in Venice. And this is the PhD program which we had links as well. Thanks for Jüri Soolep and thanks for Toomas Tammis. Pippo is a member of International Committee of Architectural Critics, advisor for the award gold medal of the Italian architecture. He's been chairing or participating to national and international design competition. He has curated and designed exhibition in Italy and abroad. He curates the Italian branch of IUAV, which is Young Architects Platform, the MoMA PS1 International Program for Young Architects. So please join me welcoming architecture practice, Pippo Ciorra.
Thank you. I may fall asleep in the middle of my talk. If it's boring, I will fall asleep first. I must, because I got up very, very early. I must be getting really old, because last time I saw Thomas, he was a student of our of our PhD faculty. Yuri is getting younger. I mean, everybody's getting younger. I'm very happy to be here because I love Tallinn. This is typical Aldo Rossi. Aldo Rossi would come out of the airplane and ask, where are we? They would tell him Bristol, and he would say, Bristol, my favorite city in the world. Tallinn I like, and I have three generations of friends here, so I'm very happy to be here. And I have never seen the new school, so I'm very happy I saw the new school, and I think it's a beautiful place to study art and architecture and to develop ideas and independent thinking. I think we are in a moment in history we need very much independent thinking. I am going to give you a short, hopefully short lecture. There is the word history in the title, or in the subtitle, but don't get scared. It will be quick. Students today are not very acquainted with architecture history, but I think it's still important to have some notion on what happened before Facebook. But also it's also a way to address the condition of architects today, to help you think yourself as architects to understand what we can do, why the society would still. I sometimes think that society don't need us anymore. I mean, they could just do by themselves, no, or just have an app to do. In Italy now, or everywhere, it's easy to find this web platform where you send your house, they send you back a project, and I mean, it's an auction. The one who wants less money does the project, so it's complicated. Also, I think it's the discussion is an investigation on talent. Talent is a very delicate issue today. You may even think it's politically incorrect. No, if it was an American school, a discussion on talent would be more complicated because talent is not inclusive. No, so talent is something you can discuss, and it's not so fashionable today. I am an architect without talent. I'm a talentless architect, so I know very well the conditions. So I had to do all these other things in life to survive. But I did build some buildings. I mean, that's the worst part. Sometimes I build more buildings than my friends who are architects full time, but that's because of mistakes. But so, I mean, talent, maybe if we were discussing with the students today, maybe to calculate what's the best condition for the carbon footprint or the best inclination for a solar panel. I mean, you don't need talent, no? Or to be a political activist, as many of the young architects we deal with today. I mean, you don't need talent. So let's see if there is an history of this talentless way of being architects, and if it's productive. And maybe we'll find it's also productive. So the first question will be, is talentless architecture possible? The second is what we got left if we erase talent from talent and building accuracy, so caring for the building you do, caring for what you do from the last 100 years of architecture. And is talent still relevant in an architectural culture which is dominated by contingent and political issues? And then there is a fourth question that we will discover later. So the historical frame for this discussion is the 20th century. The 20th century was a dialectical, dichotomic century. You had to be either on one or on the other. You know very well this in this country, but we know also Italy was a border country with a very with a condition which was very much informed by Cold War. You had to be communist or democratic. You had to be with Real Madrid or Barcelona, Beatles or Rolling Stones. I mean, everything was dialectic in the 20th century. So this is an interesting start, I think, for us to understand this dichotomic condition pops up in architecture. A few days ago, this wonderful British man died, Freeman Dyson, a physician, a scholar of quantums and advanced physics. One of the nicest lectures he gave and nicest things he wrote is this essay that divides the scholars or whatever the humans in birds and frogs. No? Birds are those who fly high. You have to see things with so many master plans today, who like to see things from above, so to have a general, comprehensive view of reality. Frogs are those who live in the mud, who get very close to things, who know details, who can investigate details. I think these two conditions are present in our. I'm definitely a bird. I get bored when I have to stay too close to things, so I'm superficial, basically. In fact, I'm a curator, I mean, of course, which is the lowest level of humanity, I think. But I think there are many architects that are frogs in the sense that they really like to get close to the thing and to do it well. I think to get closer, step by step, to architecture, an important essay would be the one by, we're still running around animals, which is also very fashionable today. But this essay by Isaiah Berlin on the hedgehog and the fox, no? Il riccio la volpe. The hedgehog is the guy who can do one thing extremely well and always does the same thing, where the fox is adaptive. No, it learns new things, it put things together, it solves things. This essay was inspirational, I would say, for Colin Rowe when he wrote this beautiful essay called Talent versus Ideas, which is exactly what we need to enter this discussion. Colin was dividing architects. Colin was very interested in talent, was very much against ideology in architecture, was very much for collage. So he was contradictory too, but he invented this interesting frame to see the role and the life of architects in the past. In fact, he started from Guarini and Ibarra. No? Guarini had wonderful ideas, and he could invent spaces, where Ibarra was more about the quality, the decoration, the accuracy, and so on. He worked for Borromini and Bernini, which I think they both had talent and ideas, or Richard Mayer versus Peter Eisenman, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to start making this, as you do in labs, no? You divide the matter to then see what happens, to analyze them together again. So if we start by separating talent from ideas. In the 20th century, ideas were the raw matter to build manifestos in architecture. So the first architect we would think of course, is Walter Gropius. You all know that we never found a drawing made by Gropius' hand in his life. So Gropius probably never traced a drawing in his life. He was telling people how to do things. He had people drawing. He was thinking. So he was a man of ideas. Definitely not a man of talent, but a very authoritative guy. Although he had around him people of big talents, no? Like, so the dialectical thing works very well. If you define Gropius by opposition with Mies van der Rohe or Marcel Breuer, the people he had around in his life. So sometimes fox and hedgehogs, they get together for the best. So we don't see much talent in Gropius' solutions. We don't see extreme accuracy in the technical quality of his work, but we see many ideas. And I think if we want to choose one building, of course, to build this manifesto, the building that supports this manifesto is the school where you had for the first time a road crossing a building, where you could see the rooms where the students live different from the laboratories. So it was this beginning of functionalism, no? So Gropius had ideas. Gropius did architecture as manifesto. But Gropius had not much talent, of course. But still, I mean, if we have to remember three names from the 20th century, I think we will have to think of Gropius too. So you can build your career also if you don't have talent. It's like art, no? In the 19th century, you should be a good technical painter to do a portrait. But then photography came, and things changed, and ideas took over. The real project by Gropius was the school, in the sense that he was putting together a space, a cultural condition, a didactic scheme, a political sensitivity. I mean, the Bauhaus was extremely politically contextualized in the problems and hopes of the Weimar Republic, but also it was putting together people. So it was choosing the best people, from Paul Klee to Moholy-Nagy to Itten to Schlemmer, to build a body, a teaching body in a school. So his project was also to put together people. It's not only to do a building. And he had around, not all of them very easy, no? Like Schlemmer, Itten was a very tough guy to deal with. Of course, if we want to find the opposite or the counterposition dialectically of the Bauhaus, we need to think of Corbu. Corbu probably had both ideas and talent, I think. But there was this supremacy of the form, the plasticity, the intuition, the drawing. Corbu was drawing and drawing and drawing every minute of his life. No? His architecture comes from drawing as a investigating, as a documenting, as an interrogating device, and as a design device, as a teaching device. So authoriality, which we forgot to discuss today with some of you, authoriality was the biggest part of his work, where for Gropius, authoriality is not so important. He was trying to put up buildings, as we saw in the first slide, by industrial elements, no? Putting together industrial elements. If we want to divert a minute to come into Italian architecture, which is rich in the 20th century, it'd be nice to compare two enormous figures. Terragni, you probably know Terragni, is the author of this incredible building, which was the Casa del Fascio, the fascist headquarters in Como, a building that Peter Eisenman has been studying for all his life, basically, and he put 35 years to publish a book, which also was loved by Colin Rowe, because he had the same pianta, the same plan of a palazzo, no? of a Renaissance palazzo. But Terragni was a hedgehog. He had this obsession for architecture. He was drawing with the same language, with the same recognizability. And when the condition changed around him, so he could not do this anymore, he died in 1943. And nobody has still exactly understood how Terragni died. Ciao. On the other side, there is Moretti. Luigi Moretti was fascist. He was an ugly human, but an incredibly talented architect. This is the fencing house in Rome. But the building I would like to propose you as a sample of this, I mean, this is the same guy, no? Building rational, extremely avant-garde, radical marble architecture in the 30s. But then in 1950s, building the most beautiful palazzina of the history of architecture. And palazzina was an illegal building at the time, no? Because the master plan of Rome was based on this 3 stories villino for the single family and the 10-story house for the middle and lower class. But this didn't work for the developers. So the developers invented this fake palazzo, which was a 5-story building with 8, 12 apartments and 3 meters around, not more. So you thought you have a garden, but you don't have a garden. And all the best architects in the city were designing the palazzina, which then was legalized, I would say, by IBA in Berlin in 1984, when they called Rossi, Grassi, Claius, Krier, all these people to build palazzina. But Moretti is incredibly rich because he put all the things together. The three partitions, so you have basement, you have the base, the body, and the pediment. But the pediment, then the building is cracked in the middle. You will find like legs, marble legs in the windows, strange things, esoteric things in the building. So an extreme, infinite richness of references. The building is called the Sunflowers because the rooms open up to get light on the 2 sides. The plan is incredibly rich. There is this small, dark courtyard that lifts you up. You can see in the section, you can see this beautiful, like, tongue coming up to welcome people in the deep core, dark core of the building. Moretti, same years, 1947-51, it does this palazzina that looks like Peter Eisenman in the 80s, no? So the potential we probably lost in Italian architecture was incredible in the 50s, 60s. There was so much, so rich, so free investigation. But Moretti had some talent, but he also had all the ideas in the world. He was a mathematician, he was a philosopher, he was interested in everything that had to do with space. He had a journal called Space, so he could think. In post-war, this diversity, the difference between ideas and talent starts to become a political issue. No, if we start, I mean, we can start from Jack Kerouac, probably, on the road. No, we go out in the street. We don't want to be in museums. We don't want to be in galleries. We want to be on the road, no? Like the Smithson with Paolozzi and Henderson in the days of preparation of the exhibition. This is tomorrow, sitting in the middle of the street, saying architecture is not about building the cool Le Corbusier modern functional building, but architecture is about public space. It's about appropriating public space and staying in a public space and living in the public space. I think the exhibition, this is tomorrow, the Whitechapel in London, co-curated by them with artists. First of all, it was the first time that artists and architecture were together in an exhibition and post-war, so it's quite interesting. But also you could see both this idea of architecture as a social, spatial, urban device, which was exactly the Smithson, and especially this incredible project they did for Golden Lane in London, the residential project, which was, this was the years when, a few years later, Umberto Eco publishes this beautiful book called Opera Aperta, no? The open work. This architecture was the open work, this system of patterns and lines that did not have a beginning and do not have an end. So architecture as an open pattern, quite as opposed to the finished, beautiful object by Corbu or by the Chiam before the Team 10. But it's interesting because in the same exhibition with the Smithsons and Anderson, there was already Richard Hamilton. We are 1956, and this guy is displaying postmodernism already, which was all about the aesthetics, the pastiche, the kitsch, the beautiful bad taste, aesthetic, seduction. And so already you see these two souls, no? How the ideas on one side and talent in managing complicated aesthetic issues, they take two different directions. And probably we could not discuss Venturi, no? Without Hamilton and without the pop art, of course. And it's interesting then Venturi and Scott Brown, but at that time only Venturi, gets completely inspired by the building from Moretti to design the Vanaventuri house. And Venturi has spent 2 years in Rome in the American Academy and got friend with these people and fell in love with this kind of complex, contradictory, full of ideas architecture. The house is exactly this. It's modern, but it's also traditional. He is fragile, it looks like cardboard, but at the same time is based on the American fireplace organization of the interior of the house. You know, everything rotates around the fireplace. I mean, it's exactly the opposite of talent, no? Is this organizing ideas in your mind, putting them together, collaging into a form, into a series of meaning that are vehiculated by a building. A nice, I think, beautiful, historically speaking, a beautiful example of the Fox and the Hedgehog issue was this first prize. You know that Adriano Olivetti was an incredibly important character, not only in the world of industry, not only in the world of politics, not only in the world of design, but also for architecture and urban design. And in 1956, Olivetti issues a prize for architecture, and there are two people who win the prize in 1956, the first edition, and they are completely opposite. On one side, you have Carlos Scarpa, sitting all the time of his life at his table, drawing and drawing and drawing, redrawing, drawing on top of his drawings, drawing in construction site, drawing on the car, going to the construction site to make his building perfect and more perfect. This is that famous cemetery in the Breann Cemetery in San Vito, a place we don't want to go now because it's one of the areas. But you see, no, this kind of obsession, this is really the hedgehog. This is really, architecture has obsession. You don't want to take your pencil away from this sheet of paper. No, this is Scarpa. And maybe sometimes you don't even know when it's time to stop, probably. Quaroni, total imperfection, political consciousness, urban consciousness, knowledge. This is a church which was built in Matera. You know, Matera is now a super hip touristic place that was the capital of culture last year, a place where people used to live in caves till 1940s. In 1940s, Matera was called the shame of Italy by both the head of the Communist Party and the head of the Christian Democrat Party. And Olivetti convinced the Americans, UNRWA, the American institution that gives money to the countries they bomb, basically, to rebuild, and involves, of course, American companies. So the American money for reconstruction in Italy through Olivetti and Bruno Zevi went to Matera. So the best architects in the country were involved to build the new housing projects for the people who used to live in the caves, excavated houses. And then now the caves are all Airbnb, of course, super cool Airbnb. And Quaroni designed the first of these villages, La Martella, with this sense of neo-realistic feeling. But it was a super interesting project, I think, which goes back very much to that Candilis, Smithson idea of the open work. It's interesting because Matera is one of those places in Italy where farmers do not live on the fields. They live in the city and then they go work and farm and they go back at home at night. So these were the houses for the farmers, and the houses of the farmers were extremely influenced by the analysis they did of this neighborhood unit. So this group of families that would live together in the caves, organizing life, like the women would help each other, the men would go to work, and things were shared. The co-housing issues we discussed today were very much there already in a very developed and interesting way. So these were a group of units, and people would organize even the economy of the community together. You have to remember that the political movement founded by Olivetti was called comunità, no? Community. And Quaroni did this mix between vernacular and modern, which was quite interesting. There was problems in the beginning because people were trying to bring animals first floor, to the second floor, because they were used to have the animals in the cave at night. But in the end, it's still there. There's still a lot of families who live there, and it was an interesting. Technically, it was a complete disaster. I think 3 years after the opening of this building, they had already to restore all the building. It was coming down. The opposite of Scarpa, I would say, the total fox. Yeah, this is just to remember, this is a Candilis project. This is La Martella. You see there were some interesting connection in this post-rationalistic, post-rational experiments of the here. This becomes like booming it becomes the frame to look at Italian architecture of the 60s, the one everybody knows, Aldo Rossi, Super Studio, all these people. So in 1960s, you can really say construction versus design. There were people interested in doing buildings, in developing their talent into design and physical and spatial performance. And there were people interested in design only as a political, or theoretically, as a political experiment, as a political statement. No? They were talking, Tafuri would talk about abstinentia. No? The architects were all to abstain themselves from building. And of course, the most complex and interesting figure we cannot avoid is Aldo Rossi. Aldo Rossi was a wonderful painter, an interesting thinker, a complicated writer, because everybody loves l'Architettura della città, but it's a very complicated, badly written book with some beautiful ideas, of course. And Rossi was using drawing as his first communication media. No? The drawing was the way to state his position in reality, in the political context, in the architecture culture, in the Italian, let's say, landscape of ideas. Of course, his buildings, when they moved from the drawing to the building, it was always a disaster. I mean, they've always been a disaster. The schools were closed like after 5 years. But they didn't care. They basically did not care. They belonged to this intellectual elite. They wanted the project to be published on Casabella. When they published the project on Casabella, maybe somebody else in Germany would answer, or Rafa Monet would answer with another article from Spain, and they would be part of this koine, of this cultural word building a future that would never come, unfortunately. But that was the opportunity for them, the reason for their architecture. So it's a kind of a vicious circle, super interesting, productive in terms of images, ideas, but which did not succeed that much in the society. It's interesting when Gallaratese, the typical contradiction was very clear. Gallaratese is a public, not how they say today, social house. Social housing, I never understand what it means. This was public housing, so publicly funded housing for people that were in lists. The project was assigned to Carlo Aimonino, Aldo Rossi Roman friend. Aimonino said, well, I need somebody who goes to the city hall in Milano, so he called Aldo Rossi. And he gave Aldo Rossi this one piece of the project. The day they opened this building to the people who had to go and live there, these people were attacked by other people that were back in the list, who physically set up this incredible fight, which was on all newspapers. So the legal people who could never enter the building, and then the other ones took over and squatted the houses and then stayed. So the contradiction of Italian left are many and very interesting, and I know them very well, and from inside. But they were totally visible in the contradictions of architecture in that time. So architecture was a political media, basically. It's interesting to see this is probably one of the most beautiful projects of the 70s, maybe more than the 70s in Italy. The cemetery in Modena, it's a competition that Aldo Rossi wins with this super beautiful drawing, the skeleton, the cube, the city. I mean, designing a cemetery like a city. No, it was the city of the dead. Then it was kind of celebrated and sanctified by the most beautiful photo by the most wonderful Italian photographer, Luigi Ghirri, which was invited by Lotus, by the magazine Lotus, to take photos, went there, said, wow, this is a shit. But then it met Rossi, they became friends, he fell in love with the building, and it took some incredible photos of the cemetery. But of course, the cemetery was built only for like 1/4 of the project. It's in very bad conditions. I went to do a visit to the Rossi Cemetery with some students from Sejima, students from Vienna, and when we went back to the 19th century cemetery, they said, oh, finally some architecture. Yeah. So it's very difficult to explain the importance of these things if you don't get the whole context, the ideas. This project were, of course, I mean, the whole interpretation of this story was firstly done by Jean-Louis Cohen with the book on Italophilie, no? This kind of connection between architecture, intellectuals, politicians, political ideas that was in the 60s. I think Jean-Louis, if he had to rewrite this book today, it would be very different. And the other, l'autre côté, the thing that our friend Pier Vittorio puts together that should never be put together is Super Studio with Rossi. Super Studio were, again, another group that had no interest in the building process, in changing physically the reality of people. No? Super Studio was performing drawings and collage as a communication media, probably against architecture, not against the risks of architecture. No? The let's say, eternal project by Super Studio is we did a big show on Super Studio, so I'm not against, but they have to be understood. The Monumento Continuo. Monumento Continuo was a building that would take over the whole world, no? Appear and do the whole circle of the world with one building made by small cubes of 3 by 3 by 3, like the thing we saw today in the review. So it was going in New York, in Rome, in Athens, and everywhere. So this is all about ideas, no? There's no need of the talent you need to do a building, of the accuracy you need to do a building, of the patience you need to do a building. Aldo Rossi would be very annoyed when they would bring him to construction site because they would make his church shoes dirty, no? It would be a problem. And he'd say, Maestro, how long is this wall? More or less like that, he would say. But it was then somebody who would. I mean, the Aldo Rossi office never produced a drawing that was higher scale than 1 to 200. Never. There was a rule in the office. Then it was given to other officers. Of course, as much of the Italian radical avant-garde, they became furniture, no? In the furniture industry, no? The Super Studio beautiful table, which sits in the room of my director in the museum. All the, let's say, global audience know of Italian architecture in the 60s is around Rossi and Super Studio and Archizoom, but then there was a lot of other people we never studied, we never looked at when we were young because we were all venerating Tafuri, and so we were against Zevi, and so we could not look at Zevi. But Zevi was a crazy but interesting guy, was supporting a lot of interesting architects that were interested in doing buildings. Super masters like Albini, the master of Italian museums, a genius like Musumeci, the most interesting engineer ever. This is the bridge near Matera, incredible, done in the early 60s with no computation, with no, I mean, it was just experimenting. Pellegrin, a crazy, interesting guy. This looks like an early OMA, but it's early OMA, but we are in the late 60s. Soleri you may know because it's the utopistic buildings in city in the desert. But this is a tile factory in Vietri, which is still a tile factory, incredibly beautiful. Interesting, like thumbnail is the Italian presence in the Osaka in the in 1970s Expo, so metabolistic Italian architecture. Or this beautiful thing by Valle, a monument, or this crazy, incredibly interesting house by Perugini, which is still there, ruined, but it's still there, built. So we did this exhibition on Zevi with Jean-Louis because we wanted to discover, to disclose all this, to fill this gap and to complete this frame, which was only limited on this ideological frame built by Tafuri around Rossi, Aimonino, Cacciari, all the I did my PhD in Venice. I grew up in this nest. But there was more, and it was extremely progressive in terms of form. But these people were, individual architects working with the building industry, so they were not considered politically correct. No, we have now this beautiful exhibition at the museum on Gio Ponti. My master would never even look at Gio Ponti because Gio Ponti was only a builder and a nice designer. He was not enough politically committed for the time. This idea of the talent and the ideas becomes again super clear when conceptual architecture comes out. I know that Thomas is an expert in this field, but as an introduction, you could read the essay by Colin Rowe. Both, the most beautiful essay by Colin Rowe is The Mathematics of the Ideal Villa, but also the introduction to the first exhibition on 5 architects in New York. It's a very good explanation on how this manipulation of the modern heritage becomes new architecture. I think conceptual architecture has like a date of birth, or at least a date of birth for the first real important building, which is, of course, the Parc de la Villette in Paris by Bernard Schumi, a terribly untalented architect, but a super intelligent scholar and thinker. And I think some of the students we talked today should probably read Architecture and Disjunction, no, for the role of the event in this idea of architecture by chance. This was beautiful because it was both the computer coming into the architect's life with the AutoCAD idea of layers and the idea of superimposition as a conceptual process in architecture, like you do in music, no? Like you, campionare, no? How do you say to campion, yeah. And buildings that had no reason of life, no? Buildings that were there only to display and materialize a concept, like the 35 red boxes in thing. It's interesting because in this competition for the Parc de la Villette, Rem Koolhaas, Peter Eisenman, Bernard Schumi, they all went to Derrida to ask for explanation and support. So philosophy was the guide for these people. So it's kind of, it's a statement, no? I'm not interested in the material quality of architecture. I'm only interested in its conceptual and speculative side. Eisenman, of course, is the perfect example for this discussion because he has no idea how to build a decent building. Now we know very well this. But he can do a lot of interesting, he did a lot of interesting thinking and experimental projects and research projects in architecture. I think I understood Eisenman when I was young through this page. This is a page by Eisenman and Derrida where the text is missing and there's only the footnotes. I think from 1980s on, architecture became this, became the impossibility of erasing what is there, but only the possibility of adding footnotes to reality. I think when the first exhibition we did at the museum that I invented was recycle. Recycle for me was not so much ecologic, but it was an ecologic slogan, of course, but I meant that we need to put things on top of other things that are already there. That's what we can do today. We cannot take off, spend a lot of energy, a lot of money, and build new things. Most of the time we can do things where on top of other things, under other things, around other things, within other things. And for me, this was also a beautiful matching of both the phenomenological side, recycling as a practice, and the conceptual side, which was the same. Like, I think I started to think of the recycle exhibition 15 years before with this page, with probably a song by Nene Cherry, which was put on top of another song. This is Eisenman for me. This is the most interesting part in Eisenman. I was teaching at Ohio State in this city, Columbus, when Eisenman built the Wexner Center, his kind of manifesto building, which is a super interesting building, totally dysfunctional, where, pillars don't touch the ground. It's interesting because 4 years after the opening, they had to spend $11 million and call Overaurup to restore the building and to make it stop leaking and so on and so forth. I think this discussion we've done was perfectly framed in the 1991 Biennale, Architecture Biennale, the 5th Architecture Biennale, which I remember very well because I was designing the Corderie. And the American Pavilion had this beautiful discussion by Frank Gehry, the artist, and Peter Eisenman, the philosopher. No? So this is exactly our discussion today. Are we more interested in the sensorial, emotional, formal, seductive, or convincing or spatial, because Gary also is interested in space, of architecture, or we need talent in that case, or we are more interested in the thinking, contextual, realistic aspect of our profession in relation to the world. Now, this is, I think, is a very actual dilemma. Dilemma on which the young Rem Koolhaas, driving an Italian car with still hair on his head, he lands on this dilemma very happily, and I think we could use one project to explain which is Rem's position in this discussion, which was the super famous project for Euralil, the beginning, a totally different world from today, in expansion. Everybody thought the money would never end. Everybody thought we could build whatever we want forever, and everybody could expand forever. So this was the beginning of fast trains in Europe, and Rem Koolhaas and OMA designed a new area of the station in Lille. And personally, Rem Koolhaas took for this office the design of the Congress Center. No, the Congress Center, you probably know very well, it's a post-functionalist projects where you can see very clearly the three parts, no? The big room, the big Congress room, the fair area, the office area, put together. I always loved this project, but I knew it was based on silicon. And when the silicon dries, the project falls apart, basically. But for me, it was an infinite source of ideas. So I think you can make it with talent, but you can also make it with ideas, I think. What's for you in this discussion? I think today we are in we started discussing this before, we are in a very specific moment for architecture because we feel the need to participate to the attempt to save the world. You know, we want to take on the issues of climate change. We want to worry about the migrants. I mean, all my PhD students work on migrants, some climate. There's still somebody working on exhibitions or things. So what can an architect do? I mean, it's very difficult to think that architects save the world, no? Because architects are a serving. They're not a deciding body. The decision makers are elsewhere. So we can provide help. We can provide knowledge. And we have to. If I were a young architect coming out of the school today, it would be very difficult to understand where I can place myself. Do I want to see how much carbon I'm using with my building, but I want also to express my talent and feel myself happy with the building I do. So maybe this is the way you could use this short discussion to build a point of view of this. Today we find a lot of people who use ecology as a communication device, no, as marketing. There's a lot of greenwash around. Or it may work, but it's like episodic, insular. I don't think we can afford an apartment in the vertical forest easily, since only the maintenance of your trees is 3,000 euros a month. No? So, and the trees are genetically designed. They do not exist. They cost a lot of money. You cannot touch them, and they can be maintained only by these scrambling acrobats that go up and down the facade. But it made Stefano. I mean, I always thought that the only talent Boeri did not have was architecture. And in the end, Stefano made it through architecture. So this also tells you a lot, no, about what architecture is today, how it melts with communication, how it melts with marketing. But it's good. I mean, he did the best for himself, and maybe it's also a good idea to put trees. But of course, my grandma had trees on the balconies too. But I mean, it's an open discussion. We don't judge anybody. Or, of course, Shigeru Ban became the famous Angora Pritzker doing shelters for, this was the Rwanda war, but then it's been used many times, even with, after the earthquake in my area. I think what's more interesting today are architects that are like, of course, sensitive to the context, to the political context, to the, this is probably the project I most like by David Adjaye, because it's this incredible house in Harlem, where 50% of the people living in the building were homeless. But it's private welfare, no? That we Europeans do not exactly know how it works. It's private welfare. The project works very well because there is a woman who runs it from this non-profit society. She's there, she runs the whole thing, she controls the whole thing. There's the museum, there is the school. It's a little utopia. But what I like in architects like Adjaye, they don't feel this obsession with authoriality. So probably the next building do not look like the one before. I mean, for Aldo Rossi, for all these people who like philosophically hated authoriality, they will commit suicide if the student wouldn't recognize this is a drawing by Rossi, no, the next time. Or this is a building by Polizello. So I think today this proteiform, this idea that you can change your language, that you can just react to the context, and you can be a very good architect, probably even win a Pritzker, because I'm sure that Adjaye will win a Pritzker soon, without the need to look always the same, no? That you have to be recognized at the first glance. In Italy, I'm putting this for one of the students, is my favorite. I think there is only one really talented architect in my country, is this crazy woman, 72 years old, lives in this small city in Sicily. She does houses, and they're all different, one from the other. This is incredible because this is the house in the winter when it's completely closed. It opens up in the summer, and this part with 2 rooms and a bathroom slides to create, so it's a transformer, no? To create a terrace overlooking the sea. So Giuseppina is interesting because she's both hedgehog, because she's very accurate, she's like an engineer in doing, but she also thinks and changes things and moves from one form to another, from one material to another, from our solution to another in a very interesting way, in a totally different scale from David Adjaye, of course. But of course, we still have a lot of people who are the real hedgehog, no? I think the real hedgehog is Peter Zumthor, of course. Zumthor is the Scarpa of the 21st century, you know? They're working on the same stone till is perfection, no? So you can still be an architect in some countries, like probably Switzerland, Belgium, Chile, Portugal, for some, they're sitting in your office and waiting for somebody to call you and give you a job, no? That's the old and beautiful idea of what an architect is, which is not working very much in many of our countries. Or, of course, I love the Japanese. The Japanese they don't care about nothing, just do beautiful buildings. And I love these buildings, and I would support them forever. So architecture is a wide, complex, and complicated word, but I think today there's very much this seduction of ideas, because the word is giving to us so many issues we need to consider. Inequality, housing crisis, although housing crisis is for me a very ambiguous, because there's so many empty houses in Europe. There's so many empty houses in Europe because everybody wants to live in London, so pay the rent. I mean, what? In Rome, there are thousands and thousands of empty houses. So let's use them. Let's transform them. Let's recycle them. But there is this. There is the climate. There is migration. There is many issues. So we need ideas. We need the ideas side. But my suggestion, which is also mine, and only mine, is to keep some space for giving room to your talent, because I mean, I'm a terrible designer. I cannot draw. I can do only sketches, the first sketch for a project. But I mean, you need to mirror yourself in what you do and save a space for our role, for our profession, no? To do something differently from the way you would do an engineer or a technical hydraulic expert or whatever. The last suggestion, for other reasons, I was in New York when Breann was giving his mass to his faithful people under him at the Guggenheim, telling that now we have only to care about the countryside. So no more cities, no more densification. We have to go to the countryside. I am very interested in the countryside, really, because I live in this typical Italian East Coast sprawl, where you have a kind of a sprawled city lasting 300 kilometers. So it's which is agricultural, touristic, productive, nature, like landscape, historical at the same time. So I think the issue is very interesting. But I mean, Breann is telling us the city is not the most important issue anymore. I don't know how sincere. He started this celebration by saying 40 years ago I was telling you the opposite. Now you gotta get this. It's interesting. I mean, I don't have answers. I think I try to teach my students. I learn from my students more than teach. To teach my students and to discuss with my students that they still have to find some pleasure in, we are still art somehow, in some way. And artists are about projects today. Artists don't want to be judged on the aesthetics today, no? Artists want to be judged on the project. So it's a wide open gray area we all live and discuss. But I do think it will be interesting to investigate these kind of gray areas in between urban, non-urban, agricultural. I mean, it's very strange that we're very happy that an architect puts 1,000 trees on the balconies, but in the same moment we are losing every year like 3 million hectares of agricultural areas in Italy, no? So this cannot work. We need to be birds and have a good view from above and understand the outcomes, the effects of what we do. But then we also need to be frogs and jump in the mud and maybe enjoy ourselves doing things in the complicated reality of today. Grazie. Thank you. It was not too long, no?
It's time for questions and discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To find something here.
Microphone. So all those with talents raise their hand, and all those with ideas.
Hi. I'm still a bit confused about what you consider talent in architecture, because it seems to me that there are some particular skills that you consider very important for an architect, and you call an architect talented when they have those skills. But in my opinion, there are so many different skills that an architect should or could have, so that no single architect can have all the talents, could be talented in all those areas. And so there is not just a talented architect and not talented, but an architect talented in some particular areas, and then there is another architect that is maybe not talented in those areas, but talented in others. So
no,
maybe
I agree. Architecture is a collective work, so you work in team. But you know, may I ask you who was working with Corbusier? No, who was working with Miss van der Rohe? But I could do nothing by myself, so I perfectly understand. But still, I know that when my master, Quaroni, had to go on a construction site, he wouldn't feel comfortable. And he had to design details and details of a building. He would not feel comfortable. Aldo Rossi would not feel comfortable. I know that Scarpa would feel comfortable locking himself into the one thing and being the individual, of course, with all the support he needs. So I think we're both right. I think this profession is definitely a teamwork. But still, when you get jobs through competitions. I mean, the ontologic meaning of this word, no? Your competition means you have to show you're better than another one. So still you have to develop your skills, however evolved they are compared to the 20th century, however expanded they are to the 20th century. In fact, we all remember that Walter Gropius never included architecture in the exams in the Bauhaus, because he thought he was convinced architecture was the result of all the other things coming together, which gives you, but there was a lot of talent there too. And I think it's interesting. I mean, we are in a changing condition. We are not in 1960s or 70s. But, I mean, I live in a country where we lost 60% of application architecture students in 1 year. And you know, in Italy, this was normal to go to architecture school. I went to architecture school in 1974 because I wanted to change the world. I didn't think I had talent. I wanted to do the revolution, so I go to architecture school. And then we made a mess, of course. We have too many architects in Italy. There's 160,000 architects, so it makes sense. But still, I see this profession in a very fragile condition today. If you go to America, I mean, you can only be, thanks to a lot of theory developed in Princeton and other place, now you can work in a 400 people office, or you do whatever, dark rooms research. There's no room for the young, small team of architects. There's only Diller and Scofidio are the only one authorized to work the high level of culture and education. All the rest is mass production in industrial offices like whatever SOM was before. So it's a fragile profession, and I think the things we want to work on today, which is energy, climate, social, are food for us, but also a danger at the same time. And I think we need to be conscious of this to manage them, simply that. I did classical studies. I went to classical studies because I didn't want to draw when I was 13 years old. So I chose architecture because of the ideas and because of the collective teamwork. But I of course, I admire those that are different from me. They have wonderful skill and artistic talent and all these things. But I think the two things have to somehow to live together.
Thank you.
Thank you. The students, we want to know what the students.
Hi.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Madly.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I have a question about, okay, I hope I don't take too long, but I have a question about names.
Names?
Names, yes. First of all, thank you for the lecture. And I got a lot of names that I actually hadn't thought.
I can give you the PowerPoint.
No.
I can leave the PowerPoint.
No, but I wanted to ask, like the other day, I was looking at one electricity box, and then like a thought came to my mind that, that's really reminds me of Jüri Okas, who is Estonian like architect and photographer. But then I thought that is so weird that my mind does that thing, that this random scene that I see, it associates a name to it.
Huh.
And today in the critique, to somebody you mentioned this, like you said a sentence that if 20th century was about masses, then the 21st is about individual. And I thought that you could also say like the opposite thing, and it could also be true.
No. Definitely not. Definitely no.
But I don't know, for me it seems that the 20th century or this architectural discourse has been quite good at building these names or things that you reference, and that, oh, I see, or that ideas have, that some names somehow claim ownership to them.
Yeah.
And then it's I find it difficult sometimes to make them my own or get past that. Or if you have, I don't know, maybe you have a comment on that. It's not really a question. What do you think about that?
To understand the world of architecture, I mean, how the architecture culture worked in the 20th century, you have to make a parallel to politics. I mean, do you want to be Corbusian or you want to be Gropiusian? No, do you want to be social democrat? And everybody wanted to design like Corbu. We were taught in school we could design only like Louis Kahn, because Kahn was sensible to history, and we were in Italy. You want to be organic or you want to be rational? So there were parties in architecture in the 20th century, exactly like politics. And the architect would feel happier and happier as many more people wanted to copy him. Today, if somebody copies Rem Koolhaas, he will sue you. They don't want to teach. They're not professors anymore. They don't want to be followed. They want to be individual. And if you come to normal people like us, the structure of society and the social media and the way industry and market work today make us all individual monads. It's like, for me, it's very simple. There is a clear metaphor. My students' parents live in single-family house. In Italy, I mean, in my school, nobody ever made me design a single-family. Single-family house was evil because it was capitalism. So nobody would teach me to design single-family house at school. Big architects, Rossi would build single-family houses, but not publish it. But everybody needs to buy, food and drinks, especially drinks, that generation. The little house that my students' family has built by themselves with a high school graduate who make the calculation of the brother-in-law was an engineer, but no architect, of course. They work as, lost in the sprawl, in the suburban, this kind of suburban agricultural space. In the house, they farm the kitchen garden or some more. They produce like the soles for Tod's, for the big shoes companies or cloth companies that are in the market. They sell sometimes, they live. So every house is a city. So, and they probably have a remote control for their gate, so they don't even know the family next door. Then they build up a city by menu, à la carte. They choose an historic center to go walking around to inhale some history. Then they choose one shopping mall, one beach, one cinema mall, and they build their city. But every one single person has his own city. I never understood this when I was in Rome. Till I lived in Rome, for me, architecture was the city. If you ask an Italian architect to design a house for your dog, he will design a city. He has like a natural reaction. So I thought architecture was the city. Then I went into the provincia, into the sprawl, into the agricultural industrial areas. And I realized that everybody think himself as a monad, as an individual nucleus in relation to which makes you very weak, because you're one with the power, one against the power, or with the power. So we need to work on this to make these people create a sense of community. Community is a dangerous word, but I mean citizenship. And then social media made this thing a million times stronger. Whereas I mean, to make me happy when I was your age, you had to take me to a violent rally Saturday afternoon with 100,000 people throwing stones to the police. This was, no? And you were one in the mass. And you wanted to, I mean, there's beautiful books on this. Massa e potere, no? Mass and Power by Canetti. I mean, there would be no, if you go to, I went to Nuremberg, I was shocked when I saw Speer's architecture, no, which is still all there. You see this piazza for this place for 3 million people. How can you think Nazism without that? So I think mass had a very strong power and role in the 20th century political. Today, everything is melting, no? Populism, sovereignty is populism, always right-wing or sometimes left-wing. What's the difference between Sanders and Trump? Well, I mean, today, each one of us want to be taken care of as an individual, not as mass. Everything has to be customized. This gives architecture new problems. This creates new problems for us. I always design mass housing, no? But when Aldo Rossi designed mass housing, he didn't totally care about the person who would live there. The family living there was raw material for his facade. But it's exact, because his facade was expressing his ideas on architecture and society. So who cares about the family? Gregotti once said, I would never live in a housing designed by me. No, yeah. So so politics is also delicate. It's something to handle with care, because my generation was totally embedded in politics, and we made so many mistakes. I'm very worried when I see who was showing today Pier Vittorio's drawings, because there's so much nostalgia of the form of ideology without even the ideology that it scares me. No? It makes me think, if this really would succeed in my students in my country, we would lose the possibility to build architecture in Italy for another 50 years at least. It's super beautiful, it's fantastic, but it's extremely dangerous, and it's a power game also. You have to always remember. When you're an academic, it's a power game. Oh, it's fun. Nice question. Grazie. We can discuss this more, man. And I can put you in touch with Giuseppina if you want.
There's, at least in Estonia, a situation where maybe architecture and arts has become too much of a rational field, and maybe politics too much of an irrational one. So basically they have switched the positions. So I'm wondering, from your position, that if you say that architecture is dealing too much of arguing for the rational values, the sustainability, the numbers behind that, then you coming from architect position and becoming a curator, where you actually daily, or maybe not daily, but quite often have to argue for artistic, spatial qualities, something that is like the soft values. How have you? What are now the tricks and methods to do that? Like how can you discuss and sell the ideas that these are the things that needs to be discussed?
I love this question. I can show you my first 4 exhibitions. I am a cynic. I mean, when my daughter was 10 years old, somebody asked Vittoria, "What does the word cynical mean?" She said, "Well, you know my father." But my first 4 exhibitions at MAXXI was recycle, energy, one on the migration of architects, migration, and food. So I think we do have to deal with these issues, but my approach was my idea was, when I did energy, I thought in the 1950s and 60s, I went to look into our archives, and the oil economy was challenging architects to produce incredibly beautiful architecture. The gas stations are Nervis bridge restaurants on the highway. I mean, the oil architecture was beautiful. So now, if we want to deal with post-oil, why can't post-oil be as interesting as that? Why can't we use these issues, these ideas, to produce beauty? I mean, I forbid my students to use the word beauty, but to produce interesting things or beautiful things. So this is for me the issue. So recycle was the same. For me, recycle was the idea that to build another building in a corpse on the existing building instead of colonizing another piece of the world can be more interesting, more fun, and more exciting and sexier, than to build a new thing. Also because it takes me away with all the bullshit. This started many years ago. The discussion on language, you have to be modern, postmodern, transmodern, whatever. I don't care. I make the language coming out from the friction between the new and the old. And he also deals with heritage, preservation, and so many. So I think we have the tools to turn these issues that we have to acknowledge into productive architectural tools, productive architecture discussion. So I'm doing it, but I want to do it my way. And of course, I confess I'm a curator. Again, the worst you can find in the world. There's my friend Marina is a curator of architectural activities in the British school in British Academy in Rome, and she's Joseph Rickwert's stepdaughter. Marina always tells me, "People, you're intelligent. Why you're a curator?" But to curate for me is, to do exhibition is a device to produce theory. It's interesting because writing, I do write a lot. This generation, the world today doesn't like criticism, doesn't like controversial. I'm a man of the 20th century. I like conflict. I think good things come from conflict. If you invite Pier Vittorio to a debate, he would say no. He doesn't like to discuss his ideas. He likes to present his ideas. But nobody likes controversial today. I let you say whatever you want because then you let me see. And everybody likes each other. And you can put even a like on what I say. No? This is a metaphor of the present. So I like controversial. I like discussion. I like conflict. The 20th century was building out of conflict things. And democracy does not work without conflict. And so criticism works so-and-so today, architecture criticism. So curating for me is a good way to produce theory and criticism, I think.
I have a question about architecture competitions.
Yeah.
But I kind of roll from, let's go back in time a bit to the generation of Strumi, Zaha,
Yeah.
OMA in the beginning. It was a time when you do a competition where you put out your ideas, and if you get lucky, you win a competition.
Yeah.
And then your career kind of goes from there.
Yeah.
For example, the case of Zaha to what Zaha's office is now.
Yeah.
I think in today's lecture, in the light of what you're saying, it went from one end very extreme to the complete other end.
I agree.
And why I'm talking about architectural competitions is that the kind of Zaha office now winning a competition, it's completely different than it was 20 years ago. But perhaps the architecture competition
itself... We can
itself,
call Patrick.
Yeah, exactly. If you call him, he would probably win the debate. He would probably have all the right answers kind of embedded in the architecture.
Well, he's a very controversial figure in architecture.
He was here.
I know.
But the same goes for Bianca.
I have problems with Patrick because of his shoes. I don't like his shoes. I'm Italian. Taste is important.
But the same goes for OMA.
Well,
OMA and Bjarke Ingels, for example, the next generation of this.
Bjarke, I mean, I was wondering this thing. I mean, there's many interesting things. Now, when I was very lucky and privileged because my ex-wife, had a serious architecture office. So when I moved from Rome, in Rome I would have never built anything in my life because there are a million architects and you don't build anything. Although I did some archaeological things. I moved to this provincial city and I had the chance to work with them, and they used to call me when there was like a cool project, the cool competition. And there was competition. You would sometimes win the competition and there is even the chance to build something, although the ratio in Italy is like 3 or 4% of competitions that get built. Now when I go, sometimes I still go to the office because there's a lot of my books there, and I see them struggling with these tenders where to win a house, you have to already have built 1 million houses. I mean, the system is collapsed, I think. So only people people like Patrick, who has terrible shoes, but is very, very well market-oriented. Patrick was able to triplicate the office in the crisis years. So it's all about business. This is business. And that's what I don't like, that there is no, I mean, business is okay, theories is okay, but there must be a space for we were discussing with Thomas today, the 10 people office, the 7 people office, because the average, la qualità diffusa, no? My master used to say, this quality that gives quality to the city, to the space we live, comes from those people. It doesn't come from SAAD or the big engineering company. So the fight has to be done to save this space for independent profession, because people like Patrick now, he's in this vortex. He cannot slow down because they will kill him if he slows down.
But do you also see it problematic that this fight is kind of juried, or this fight is decided by a jury who makes a decision what is better? There's 10 people office producing ideas.
I know.
Or Zaha's kind of streamlined kind of folder of ideas kind of placed into the right
But I mean, it's all about, I'm sorry, but I was going to say a terrible thing, but it's all about people that likes you in the jury. No, yeah, I know, but there is no, I mean, public tenders in Italy, they all based on numbers. Numbers mean you can build an hospital if you can already build 10 hospitals. Then when do I start? So it's a very difficult issue, the competitions. I think in every country there is, I mean, competitions always only work if there are really many of them. So everybody will find his format. Because the big guys work for the big guys. When I was a finalist for the MAXXI, for the museum I worked for. We were a group of Italian, Mosè, Aldo, and me. And we were selected for the final. This was wonderful for us. But then somebody from the jury told us, well, now you have to be happy. You can't win. I said, why can't we win? Because we need a name. But this is terrible now, because when I was in Casabella years ago, I know that if I would bring my chief head, Francesco Dalcò, a complicated, cranked project by an Italian young architect, they would say, no, fuck it. If I would bring it signed by Stephen Hall, he would publish it. So we stayed back, basically. So that's why I wrote Without Architecture. Because, and I was also, another interesting thing which is pressing for you is that I was driving illegally because my car was broken last week, and I passed through small streets in normal East Coast Italian cities, and I saw houses from the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, a beautiful average quality, a lot of architects working there, people that would call an architect to build their houses, the developers and the construction companies were using architects and looking a little bit for quality. And I have the impression that, at least in my country, this is lost. And I encourage you, because I think there is a more generally shared ambition to modernity in this country. That's why I did the exhibitions with the Baltic countries, like, it was 15 years ago, Trin? The war thing was like 2005, because I think there is in this area there is a will to. It's a young country, no? You want to build the world. You want to build a new world, and you need architecture to be modern in the sense that to belong to your time, and to express also story. I don't believe in the word ethics for us. I only believe in the word aesthetics because it embodies, it incorporates ethics if it's good. Otherwise, it doesn't work. I mean, ethics without aesthetics for us don't work. So, but here I mean, there's a lot of very good architects in this country. There is a sense of modernity which is, although it's a young country, no, with a heavy architectural history before, but competitions, you'll never find the perfect solution. You just have to fight that they do many, because if they do many, you can penetrate the system somehow. Se potrebbe pure smettere. Yes. Grazie.